Hello, this is David Hall, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar presented by the IoT M2M Council and sponsored by Inmarsat, Orbcomm, and Verizon. Since its establishment in 2013, over 25,000 adopter members have joined the IoT M2M Council, which has focused on making the implementation of IoT and M2M solutions simpler, faster, and more profitable for its member base. If you are not a member, please consider joining by applying on our website, iotm2mcouncil.org. Before we begin, we wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's presentation will be approximately 45 minutes long, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session with our panelists. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. All of the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or if we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Please know that we do capture all of these questions. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your computer speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is up so that you can hear the presenters. If your slides are delayed, pushing the F5 button on your keyboard will refresh the page. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 1 day after the webcast and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Jared Bazzi. He is the Director of Research and Conference Programs for the IoT M2M Council. Jared?
Thank you, David. Good morning. Thank you to all of you who have joined us to learn from our esteemed panel of speakers. You're coming in from all over the world, and we appreciate your time being here with us today. I don't have a lot in the way of introductions. We have the presentations lined up. We're going to hear from Orbcomm, from Inmarsat, and Verizon in that order. And I think it's not only a very interesting topic, but what's interesting at this juncture as well, from our perspective here at the IoT M2M Council, is where these speakers, these professionals, veterans of the supply chain IoT industry, are interested as well to learn from you about what your thoughts are on the prevailing technologies, and we want to help them understand what your needs are, where you're going, and how they can help you. Our panel consists of Michael Dempsey, Vice President, Container Solutions, Container and Port Solutions with Orbcomm, Paul Bedard, Senior Manager, Business Development and Strategy with Verizon, and Mike Holdsworth, Sector Development Director, Transportation Enterprise with our Inmarsat. So, Michael, you're going to lead us off. I'll ask you to say a few words to introduce yourself and take us away.
Great. Thank you very much. This is Mike Dempsey. I'm the Vice President of Sales for the Container and Port Solutions team within Orbcomm. We represent only one portion of the overall teams working inside of Orbcomm on the supply chain, specifically on over-the-road transportation. I wanted to kick in today a little bit, talk about where we are in the supply chain with smart assets, and sort of a good segue to Orbcomm. Without making this an infomercial, just wanted to give a quick background. Orbcomm is one of the leaders in industrial Internet of Things. We provide asset tracking, monitoring, and management solutions, integrating both satellite and cellular network connectivity. We manufacture hardware and sensors for our applications, and then provide a strong suite of actual applications, portals based in the cloud, which allow you to manage your assets. We work in a variety of areas. Today's discussions can mostly be around the supply chain and specifically more on transportation, but we're also in energy, manufacturing, and heavy equipment. Just get an idea of the state of the industry today, where we are, where we think we are. Historically, the supply chain before the advent of IoT and M2M, we use the phrase around Orbcomm of dumb, dark, and disconnected. What that really means is that most manufacturers, most distributors of products had very little idea, no idea of visibility and control over their assets. They may travel in various modes of transportation, whether it's road, rail, intermodal, on the water, but beyond maybe the first mile and last mile, they had very little idea where those assets are. Also very difficult to mitigate any issues that may occur during the transport of their assets and their cargo inside the assets. That could be, for example, theft. If a theft occurred and there was a break into a container, it would be very difficult to identify where and when that occurred until you get to the very end of the trip. Another real issue in this area is hard data, being able to collect data across the full width of the trip. There may be isolated silos, as stated below. There may be in individual areas where there is data available, but across the entire movement of your goods, whether that be truck, rail, or on water, very difficult to get a strong picture of the position and the status and condition of the cargo. Where we've evolved to today, and specifically the topic of this webinar, is around visibility, what we call visible, smart, and connected assets. Essentially, being able to leverage telemetry technology, specifically IoT technology, to your advantage. We've seen rapid advancements over the last 5 years in this sector. It's getting a significant amount of press as well, but really the combination of advanced hardware plus cloud platforms plus data analytics and optimization tools to be able to provide, fill in the gaps essentially that we just talked about. This is all really tied to this explosion of the Internet of Things, not just in the supply chain area, but also you see this in retail and homes across a number of different sectors. I think bottom line, we're talking about there being something like on the order of 20 billion connected things by 2020. Those could be from smartphones to your smart car. And to bring it a little more home, inside of the supply chain sector, for example, in container area, which I specialize in, there are over 18 million dry containers in the world, something on the order of almost 2 million refrigerated containers. So we're talking about a significant number of assets out there that can benefit from the use of IoT. At the bottom of this whole conversation is really the concept of smart assets. So what does that mean? Essentially taking some kind of wireless IoT telematics, that could be RFID, that could be cellular-based, that could be satellite-based, and potentially sensors, and have them report on the position and condition and potentially other data around that asset and the cargo within. So really the net of that is real-time visibility and control for those who are deploying IoT technology to their assets. And if you look at today, that's not just isolated to road or to rail, but across all modes of transportation today, across all modes of the supply chain, we're seeing the use of IoT technology. I wanted to give you a couple examples to sort of bring it home. One in the United States here, J.B. Hunt. J.B. Hunt is one of the leading intermodal, over-the-road and intermodal providers today. System deployed that they're using today has 90,000 devices, which are fixed to either the trailers, as you see in the picture here, or to 53-foot special-built intermodal containers, which allow them to track and trace their containers. But beyond that, they've also fully integrated sensor technology where they have sensors mounted on the front of each of those container or trailer to shoot down the length of the container or trailer and give us a status as to whether it is empty or full. This enables them to be able to quickly identify when an asset is empty and dispatch a trucker to go pick up that asset and return it to their depots, which increases for them utilization of the assets. Another example, CR England, you've probably seen some of their trucks on the roads in the United States, over 7,000 refrigerated trailers and containers. Telematics help them not only in managing the quality of the refrigeration in terms of knowing the exact temperature, but also which led to essentially reduced claims, but also the idleness of their trucks. They want to increase utilization just like J.B. Hunt did, and so this way they can actually see and look at individual locations and see how long those assets have been sitting and take the appropriate actions to recover those assets and to reuse those quickly. And finally, in the United States, there's also an issue around what's introduced this past April and last year in April 2017, what's called FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, in which there are regulations now to be able to report and capture the data of refrigerated transport across all nodes of the supply chain. And the data from IoT Solutions is helping support that. And finally, one closer to home for me, which is Maersk Lines. Maersk Lines is the world's largest shipping line, container shipping line. They have today, with the acquisition of Hamburg Süd, which occurred just before Christmas, they have something on the order of 370,000 containers, which are refrigerated containers, which are on the road, and on rail and on the water. They've also used satellite technology satellite and GSM technology to enable over 400 vessels, so to allow them to report and get data on both the vessel conditions as well as the containers on that vessel. One of the unique things that Maersk has done in this particular case using IoT technology is what they call prescriptive analytic tools. They can look at the condition of a refrigerated container and decide whether or not to provide maintenance to that in the form of what they call pre-trip inspections. But essentially, once they've determined that, they can automatically, via the internet, send notifications to service providers worldwide whether that particular box should be serviced or not. And that has significantly reduced the amount of money that they spend on what they call these pre-trip inspections. So internally, they've benefited significantly. Today, over 60% of the users of Maersk Line reefer containers are actually getting IoT data for free from Maersk Lines through their web portal. So in closing, I think really just 3 quick snapshots there, but to say IoT in the supply chain is real. I gave you a couple examples of that. We see the adoption rate is increasing in some sectors, for example, over-the-road reefer transport, both in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere in the world. That is already significant, probably somewhere in the order of 80% plus. In the container sector, we're just at the very, very nascent industry. Reefers have been started to adopt IoT technology. But at the end of the day, we're seeing a pickup across all sectors of the supply chain. And I think as we move forward, and we'll talk about this a little bit today, if you look at analytics and process integration, what does that mean? IoT is generating significant amounts of data from the asset itself. So, for example, with Maersk, we're processing over 4 or 5 million transactions a day. All that data is collected, and now companies are successfully using analytics tools to be able to mine that data and make decisions about how to best deploy technology, how to best deploy their assets across the supply chain, and integrating all of their trading partners into that process through the use of that big data. So we are seeing a change in the entire view of how one looks at the supply chain today based on IoT technology. With that, I'll close off and hand it off to Mike, who's going to take you from here. Mike?
Hi, thanks, Michael. So my name's Mike Holdsworth. I'm the Director for Transport for Inmarsat. We're a global satellite operator. Within our part of Inmarsat, we also utilize other technologies to try and create a seamless connectivity environment. So we also utilize cellular wireless technologies in the supply chain. We've been involved in IoT, mainly from a background around M2M, other sectors as well as transport and logistics, so heavily involved in mining, oil and gas and utilities. If you discard the land side, which I'm responsible for, we're also heavily involved in maritime shipping and also in the aviation network, where there's an element of machine to machine in both of those 2 sectors. We see IoT revolutionizing the supply chain. I kind of look at it and think it's a little bit like when we had silicon chips the first time around, and there was new use cases, new capabilities. People were creating FPGAs with customized software on. And for me, I think that the equivalent now is actually the sensor, where we're seeing a massive amount of revolution, hackathons, new ideas, is actually the sensors themselves. Creating wireless sensors with NFC, RFID, BLE, temperature sensors that are wireless, energy harvesting sensors so they can sit there and gather energy locally. That kind of area is definitely a very exciting area, and it's one that I'm going to cover today. So in terms of IoT connectivity in action, what I thought I'd try and do is give the audience an idea of the art of the possible. The key thing that we try and achieve as Inmarsat is to have an engagement at the industrial endpoint. It might be pharmaceutical companies, petrochemicals, etc., But we are an indirect company, so we work through partners such as Orbcom and other partners within the supply chain. We take an asset, we create an environment where we can enable different types of sensor on that asset, and then we use particular infrastructure to carry the sensor data, and it might be that it's low-powered WAN, it could be IDP, which is a service that Orbcom are very well involved in. It might be a broadcast service, so we might be providing navigational corrections to the vehicle, or GPS or GNSS augmentation. And then we've also got cellular. And so how we integrate these together is in a single cohesive network architecture. The routing and the security is all covered, so that in effect we can follow multiple paths through the different modal journey, whether it's land, sea, or potentially air as well. And the key thing here is what we're trying to do is deliver actionable data. This may be via a portal such as the ones that Orbcom have covered, or it could be a specific AEP platform providing data analytics. But the key thing is that the data is actionable. You can take corrective action, whether you're looking at predictive maintenance, or you're looking at positioning, or you're looking at the temperature of specific types of products. In the way that I look at transport, and I have to look at it in a fairly generic high-level fashion, because I look after connected car, the rail sector, intelligent transport systems, and logistics. I take a fairly four-point viewpoint on it. I have fleet management as an area, transportation management, safety and security, and track and roadside, which might be in the rail environment, trackside sensors, or on the roadside, monitoring bridges, crossings, etc. We look at different things here, so we might be looking at the fleet management position of vehicles. In transportation management, typically it's a sort of trace element. We're looking at the condition of the goods that are being passed around and getting very involved there in different types of new technology. Safety and security, we tend to look at things like if you're using cellular or GPS positioning on the vehicle, it may be jammed. Are there ways that we can use satellite technology to reduce that jamming or the events of that jamming? Are there areas that we may be able to transmit and receive on different types of satellite frequency to get away from people, organised criminals, for example, jamming the signals going into the wagon? And on the track and roadside, typically it's done with the operators of the highway or the rail track, so we'd be looking at maintenance and operational benefits there. If we take I call it the homework question, but we were specifically looking at the global supply chain. And so from an Inmarsat perspective, we have connectivity options with land, sea and air on satellite. We also have options on terrestrially with cellular networks as well, and potentially putting cellular in the maritime environment and then backhauling it over satellite. We've pretty much got the entire multimodal logistics supply chain covered with some form of connectivity. We're typically looking at event trigger data, so there's a number of different solutions for this, and what we try and do is we try and enable, where possible, passing opportunities through to different operators to provide a service. Key for me would be the pharmaceutical sector, which is where I tend to spend most of my time at the moment. And I think one of the reasons why it's so critical is the value of the goods within a container. We're doing projects currently where we're monitoring down to a vial for a vaccine, looking at doing NFC and RFID, and then taking that information locally in the container and putting it out over satellite or cellular, using the product called IDP, which we developed with Orbcom. We also look at specific industry sectors and the supply chain in those. Oil and gas would be key areas, petrochemicals, moving different types of agricultural chemical around, and also automotive and aerospace, where we might be tracking aircraft parts, measuring shock and vibration, checking the chain of custody. So if an event happens where someone drops something, we can actually work out who actually owned the insurance element there, whose chain of custody was it in, If you drop TVs at a sports event. So there's a great deal of work already going on in the supply chain. We already have an existing heritage in IoT and M2M. And I think the main thing is a lot of the disruptive ideas that the supply chain operators and end users are coming up with, we may already have solutions for. So I'm keen that, between the three companies, people can come and engage with us. I think there's a lot of value to having discussions around blockchain, machine learning, and actually doing an element of processing on the vehicles at the edge rather than sending everything back over the connectivity. And I think key is analytics and visualization. Actual actionable data is key to this. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Paul Dempsey at Verizon, who's going to cover off the third piece in our talk.
Hey, thank you, Mike, and Michael as well, and Jared. Special thanks to the IoT Machine-to-Machine Conference for hosting this today. Verizon has, a long-standing partnerships with both Orbcomm and Inmarsat in a variety of ways, and we leverage each other to deliver comprehensive solutions that impact businesses across the globe. And so excited to be here. This slide here, if you've all seen variations on this. These numbers aren't a surprise, but certainly are reflective of, the significant growth of the market. I think it was 12.1 billion connected devices at the end of 2015. We're at 18 now. We'll see anywhere from 20 to 30 billion connected devices by 2020. And then, market spend itself will be in upwards of 1.3 trillion with a T in 2020. So I think it was just last year, it was 700 billion. So we're looking at a healthy CAGR of nearly 16%, led by manufacturing. I was actually surprised at the extent to which manufacturing leads in IoT investment, double that of transportation and utilities. I think it's in the neighborhood of 190 billion. But if you think about smart manufacturing strategies and Industry 4.0 and how the supply chain is dependent upon lean manufacturing principles, it's also a transformative time, I think, for manufacturing, given that they need to think in terms of moving from, building products but to delivering services. So some buzzword bingo of the day would be productization to servitization and the incorporation of IoT into the design phase of their products. From a transportation standpoint, I think, I can go back to 1988, and I think it was Qualcomm initially delivered a fleet management solution to the long-haul trucking industry, and we've seen that evolve over the years to incorporate more mobile and fleet management resource solutions that now enable predictive maintenance programs, impact safety through driver behavior, and accountability around data logging as trucks cross the borders. So utilities also right up there as well. Think about the smart grid. Verizon is doing a lot of work in delivering a smart grid as a service solution, to the industry. Think of sensors deployed across the grid, and not just electric, but water and gas as well, to identify where the problem is, and then get that truck roll out to specifically where it needs to be. And so think of all the efficiencies gained as a result of that. Over the years, Verizon has invested quite a bit, not just in core capabilities. I was there back in 2006 when we were really thinking and acting like a traditional telecom service. Global IP, wireless, and you've since seen. All you need to do really is look at the last couple of years to see investments and acquisitions that support the accelerated deployment of IoT And if you look at a couple of the fleet management acquisitions, it positions us right smack dab in right near the top, if not the top, in fleet and mobile resource management globally. So, you marry that with investments in IoT and advancements in network technologies, and then you add in the media assets, and you now have quite a compelling story to tell to not just connect things, but engage people and streamline processes. So, you can't scale to billions of devices if you don't have the tools to put development capabilities into the hands of developers, as well as to manage, provision, monitor, and control all those billions of devices. So Verizon has created a platform to do just that. So think of it as a developer community that provides an on-ramp, an easy on-ramp to IoT. So we're delivering APIs, application keys, dev kits, test tools, so we can accelerate from prototype to market. Now there are about 14,000 developers today just on this platform pulling down APIs, but globally we expect IoT-specific developer community to exceed. I've seen as much as 6 million. You see 3 million in 2019 there. But there's, again, tremendous energy around the Internet of Things and the development associated with it. You heard Mike discuss a lot of the drivers. We've seen machine-to-machine IoT connectivity leveraged in all the verticals throughout the years that you see here. Advancements forward in network capabilities, bandwidth, latency has enabled wireless technologies to be used to serve as a primary or a backup communications path for fixed locations. And with the absolutely transformative capabilities provided by 5G going forward, you'll see wireless, gigabit type of speeds, and again, latency characteristics to enable virtual reality, smart cities. It's going to be quite an exciting time in the coming months and years as we deploy that. We mentioned manufacturing, and Verizon is doing some things to deliver simplified hosted services to manufacturing to enable the continuous parameter-based monitoring of distributed industrial assets in order to identify anomalies in the condition of that equipment, and therefore trigger automatic workflows and communications to keep machines up and running, to keep the manufacturing process moving forward, and then to envision new service models for manufacturers. Asset tracking, obviously, is where I sit, and I see a tremendous amount of opportunity. We'll talk in a minute about advancements forward in network technologies and the supply chain. So let's get a little bit into some of the technologies. You see Cat M1. So what is that? So essentially, it's a cellular technology specifically designed for the needs of applications targeting the Internet of Things. So think of it as a special IoT network. It's essentially leveraging the same standards that deliver 4G services today, but it's designed to support lower to medium data rate applications. So think smart metering, basic building maintenance functionality, and of course a broad range of monitoring sensors. Again, that's an explosive area. Mike made mention of that. And of course, asset trackers as well. So again, enabling visibility and control throughout the supply chain and sending all that data over networks that are designed specifically for this type of data. And this network requires a lot less power. The devices will last longer in the field, which is important. for those containers and chassis that are out there in the wild for long periods of time. And Verizon is deployed nationwide here in the States, and you don't need to look too far to see what other carriers are doing throughout the world to enable similar technology like narrowband IoT. Again, another IoT-specific network technology, also standards-based, also in licensed spectrum, and will deliver speeds of maybe 100 kilobits per second or less, but again, perfect for IoT-style devices. So you'll see some announcements from Verizon and other carriers about the broader deployment of these. And of course, Verizon does have a satellite offering. You've already heard of where the fit might be. It's not always cellular services available everywhere. There are remote locations, and I think wind farms, solar farms, pipeline pressure sensor monitoring applications for oil and gas companies out there in remote areas, and I think of Class 1 freight railroads and really closing that gap or providing primary communication services. And Verizon has built a program envisioning satellite and with security built in from the ground up. So again, I really do like, as Mike mentioned, dumb, dark, and disconnected to visible, smart, and connected. That really tells the story. We all are seeing a lot of activity driven by compliance, and I think Mike mentioned the Food Safety Modernization Act. Verizon is talking with customers today that are in the global seafood industry, in pharmaceuticals. They need to track these sometimes high valuable, perishable shipments as they make their way through the U.S. and globally. And this is a very real thing with a lot of attention, a lot of movement, a lot of interest, and so things just don't get lost. As they make their way through the supply chain, there's a real need to understand the quality of that good as it makes its way. So moving on, I just made a slight mention of this. What we've seen is the sort of a slower than expected over the years adoption of IoT. I think it's ramping up now, but it's really been due to, I think, its perceived complexity. There's not always a clear ROI. It's, as a fragmented ecosystem. So what Verizon has done is work toward delivering end-to-end platform as a solution offerings to vertical industries like utilities, transportation, manufacturing, and so look out for announcements where we provide everything from the network to the device, the platform, to the management tools, to the analytics, and everything in between to, again, simplify the deployment of IoT in the market. And I'll end on security, because you really can't think about IoT connectivity in this day and age without addressing security. And we approach it in three ways, both network, device, and data security. And most specifically, we've been focusing on IoT security credentialing services. So it's designed with IoT in mind. It's designed to address security features. Essentially what it does is it creates digital certificates and authenticates devices and machines in a way that is not dissimilar to what you understand today as two-factor authentication. So developers now can secure single points of vulnerability throughout the supply chain without having to create complex, expensive, private networks. So this is a secure solution regardless of network transport type. And really, this will really help scale security as it relates to IoT, to millions on devices. And then the last thing, I think Mike mentioned blockchain. I think it's such an exciting technology. I don't think one can underestimate the ultimate impact that blockchain will have on the global supply chain. In fact, I've heard some refer to this distributed ledger system as the killer app for supply chain. Today, largely the global shipping industry is using, 60-year-old technology called EDI. There's a lot of paper-based documentation. If blockchain combined with the near real-time data enabled by IoT connectivity can lead to not just more timely information but better visibility, then this also, when combined with blockchain, enhances interconnectivity between suppliers, shippers, and customers. If everyone can look at the same information, then now we're talking about getting people paid faster, improved reconciliation, and certainly reduced fraud. So that's it for me at this time. I'd like to hand it back over to Jared to handle the Q&A portion of our program.
Thank you, Paul and Mike and Michael. There's a lot to talk about here. We have a lot of good questions coming in. This is a complex set of issues, and you step back toward the end there to talk about blockchain and sort of a bigger picture view. And I also want to step back maybe as we transition to Q&A and see if each of you might comment on how regulatory and policy environments are evolving as it relates to this stuff. It's within the vertical industries that you're serving. It's in your own industries in terms of rendering these solutions and making them available. It all, on some level, depends on policy and regulation. So what does that mean to your business, or how do you see that evolving moving forward? Paul, since you got me thinking about that, let's start with you, and then we can go back to Michael and Mike.
Yeah, this is Mike Dempsey. I think I have to say that fundamentally, a lot of the things that happen, governmental regulations and or guidelines, are having a serious impact on the IoT marketplace, and that's a very positive impact. I'll give you an example. In the United States, over the last 2 years, the California Air Resources Board, or what they call CARB, put down a mandate that only certain quality engines with certain quality particulate output could be used in California. And that fundamentally changed how the business did, at least on the container side of the industry. And the fact is that shipping lines now had to ensure that when they shipped a refrigerated container with essentially what they call a genset or a generator set, which is a power pack, or the diesel-based power pack for the reefer, that it had to be a clean engine. And if you sent a dirty engine from Chicago into California, there were significant fines, and those went up on somewhat like a Richter scale that became worse after you've had multiple fines. So one of the most expedient ways to do this, apart from a huge amount of labor, was to actually use IoT technology, tracking devices, to be able to watch and to ensure that, in fact, no shipping line sent a dirty genset into California. It's an immediate one, and it actually boosted the marketplace significantly over the last 2 years.
And this is Paul from Verizon. So when I think about other government regulations, we don't have to look too far past what Mike just mentioned around the rail industry. So the Rail Safety Improvement Act of 2008, mandated that the Class 1 freight railroads and implement a system called positive train control to improve safety, to remotely control the locomotive and its cargo along the rail bed. We've seen other technologies deployed to measure vibration and the acoustic profile of the tracks to, again, improve safety. So it's not just food modernization, drug enforcement, but also rail safety.
Mike, anything to add?
I was actually going to talk about the rail, and then I got beaten to it. I think from our side, what we're seeing is regulation in the frequency and spectrum in some of the wireless technologies needs to be very carefully understood when looking at deploying it in the supply chain. I've seen a few people getting caught out when they've tried to use LoRaWAN sensors from the US and then try and move assets into Europe and Asia. And it's a different frequency And actually, if you use different radios, sometimes it can be illegal in the country you're going to. So I think that side of regulation is one where we're at the beginning of using this technology in the supply chain. And actually, some of the ways that it's regulated already exist, and we need to, as a collective, we need to be aware and understand that element of IoT.
So, where the group of you work together, this is interesting that you have business partnerships and you're working on these frontiers together. So, I'd be interested to revisit to some extent. You will have touched on this in your presentations, but to discuss a little bit what key factors are driving the adoption of IoT technologies in the supply chain. I mean, we touched on some of the some mitigating factors in regulatory and policy, but even then you're referring to a growth in this market for you. So, be interested to hear if each of your views on market drivers are aligned with each other.
Well, I know that, Paul, from... Go ahead, please, Mike. Go ahead.
No, I think maybe these, Paul and Mike can echo this, but because each of us, we represent essentially the three companies on the webinar today, really represent a basket of technologies which all work together in various fashions. And I think if you look at the end users that we're addressing, the applications that we're addressing, the benefit to the user ends up typically falling into a couple of buckets. One of those is obviously internal efficiencies, that they in fact can use the technology to enhance their own operational capabilities. This was the example I gave with Maersk, that they had a significant reduction in external costs for maintenance of their reefers. Another bucket is really, and that also could extend to things like utilization. If I know where my assets are, I can get better utilization of those. And as an extension of that, I can buy less assets in the future because I'm managing the assets I have better. The external expression of that is that customers can benefit from the technology. And this, again, back to Maersk and to others, many of these companies in a highly competitive environment are finding that they have to be able to provide that data to customers in a timely fashion to simply retain them. I mean, IoT technology has almost become the entry-level requirement for many, many shipping lines today across the world and other carriers, over-the-road carriers, especially in the U.S. and especially in the refrigerated sector, because you must be able to provide that data to your clients to ensure that you, as a provider, a logistics services provider, are meeting their fundamental service level requirements. And so I think it has an outward expression as well. And then you can apply to what we just talked about with the government regulatory compliance, which is sort of a third requirement, but sits as an overlapping, as an overarching kind of requirement for all of these. So, like many other industries, you can split them sort of internal, external, and then you've got the government compliant piece in terms of benefit.
Yeah, this is Paul, and that about covers it, really. I think the ability for medium-sized concerns to compete with the big boys and deliver the same type of visibility to location and condition of the finished good in transit is hugely important. And oftentimes there's not a lot of resources available to build it themselves, so the Orbcoms of the world, working with Verizon and MSF as well, can deliver these services. The end user consumes the product, benefits. I think 1 in 6 Americans gets ill at some point during the year by virtue of foodborne, disease, and therefore, right there. To maintain the integrity of a shipment certainly has that kind of impact. Inventory management right there at the vending machine, right? So that there's the favorite beverage is always available when it's out. It doesn't have to wait 2 or 3 days for the truck roll. IoT technology, sensor technology can deliver real-time information to replenish the supply. Just another sort of tangible benefit to the consumer.
Well, I can think of 2. One would be we've had dialogues with insurance agencies around mitigating risk and the fact that if you deploy some of the technology that we're actually looking at. Can some of this be standardized in the supply chain? And therefore, some of the insurance premiums can be reduced if people are actually deploying equipment that the insurance companies have ratified and understand. So that's one thing. There's an area which is really interesting at the moment, which is conflict minerals and batteries and things like electric cars. As electric cars gain momentum, clearly they're there now, but as they gain a higher percentage of the vehicular population, they use cobalt in the batteries, and cobalt may or may not be a conflict mineral, and so you end up with this scenario where you must be able to trace where the cobalt came from for Apple phones, smart devices, batteries in cars. And I think that kind of area we'll see a lot of interest in over the coming years, definitely.
Thanks, and it's good to hear these examples of actual applications, how they're being used in the industries that you're serving. I think it would be good to in fact hear a little more where questions are coming in the audience about how you at Inmarsat, how satellite providers are handling cold chain pharma, the issues you were just touching on, and I think it'll be interesting to hear more about how you're working together to, in some cases, guarantee. There's some certainly maritime services that satellite is really your option, but we heard from Paul about how Verizon is doing more and more in this area, and you have these business partnerships together. So, when if I want to develop an IoT supply chain and leverage IoT, I want to get that out there. What should I be looking for from you? I mean, what can you tell me about how these evolutions that are occurring in IoT networks and in sensor technology? What should we be looking for? How do we make sense of that?
A lot of ways to approach this one. This is Paul again. Verizon, just by virtue of participation in organizations such as IMC, is helpful in disseminating information. And, we are constantly making ourselves present in large trade shows like the HIMSS show, for example, around healthcare, retail shows, as well as and publications, and just trying to get the word out that IoT technologies are relevant to the business and may at first seem complex, but we're all working together to deliver platforms to remove that complexity and to sort of get everyone to understand that if you don't move forward and deliver these services today, you'll end up like 70% of the Fortune 100 companies in the manufacturing vertical who are no longer Fortune 100 companies. They were 10 years ago. They're not now. It's usually because they're not investing in technologies to keep up. And we're just kind of working together to, again, remove the complexity, deliver hosted platforms, address security. Verizon publishes a data breach security report every single year to get organizations to fully understand the implications of not approaching their solutions from a security perspective. So again, lots of I think it does take a grouping of partners, and I think we'll continue to do that.
Hi, it's Mike from Inmarsat. I think from our point of view, what I would say is if you want to look at a really good layout of how IoT can work in the supply chain, there's a slide that I've seen from Orbcom that shows a really good structure about the different elements there in terms of automation and things like that. I think what I would say is keep the focus on the workflow that the end user has, how it integrates into SAP. Think big but start small. So make sure whatever you're doing with IoT as an end user, you're trying to integrate it into your existing workflow so that when it does actually scale up, you don't have to completely re-engineer it and try and add it as a bolt-on. It's actually built in from the start. And a few people miss that. They try and do IoT as a kind of bolt-on to everything else they're doing. It doesn't work that way.
I'd comment to you, ask about what we're seeing in the marketplace in terms of development. One of them that's actually surprised me quite a bit is if you look at an IoT stack today, essentially the technology stack, you sort of have hardware and sensors at the core of that, and above that you have a connectivity level, which is represented by Paul with Verizon and Mike with Inmarsat, one a cellular technology and the other one a satellite-based technology. And what we're finding in deploying systems is that we're significantly using both those technologies, and in many cases dual mode devices, which are communicating where possible using cellular networks and where not possible using Inmarsat satellite. There are a number of places in the world, especially on the water, for example, where we have to use satellites, and whether that be our own satellite systems or whether that be a partner like Inmarsat. So it is unique in the fact that at the connectivity level, we're seeing lots of options. LoRa was mentioned earlier, and several other emerging technologies. And you add that to the sensor technology level, we are just seeing all sorts of the emergence of all sorts of sensors available. Many of those based on very, very standard, if you want to call it retail technologies like Bluetooth Low Energy or BLE, which are enabling us to do cargo monitoring, door monitoring, equipment monitoring. Any number of assets can leverage the Bluetooth technology, which is prevalent, and most of us know how to use it and have used it with our own speaker systems at home. So these kinds of sensor technologies are changing the face of IoT very, very quickly.
So, again, this is it's a very vast topic, and we're approaching the top of the hour. I feel like we've really just scratched the surface on this. So many moving parts. I think some people on the call are perhaps wondering more about certain characteristics of their options in the U.S. market as it differentiates from international options, for instance, whether that be a question of speed that may be available to them. So I'm wondering if you could share some thoughts on some of the ground level in the marketplace, differences between geographic regions that may exist, and that may even be within the contiguous U.S. I don't know, but I think you're all pretty much able to cover us coast to coast. But what's the big picture from a regional market point of view?
Shall I? Jump in. I'll go now.
No, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say what we typically see is that there's very few places on Earth where you've got 100% cellular coverage. You may have it on some routes in the US. One of the only places we've ever seen 100% is Korea. So you tend to have different flows, and you may have networks that have connectivity and some that don't. And so we've seen people utilising roaming SIMs on cellular to be able to jump between different cellular networks. And that's maybe very much a European thing. I'm not sure about the US, but what we typically see is that you have to be able to connect. And often the areas where there are no cellular coverage, they tend to be remote. There's no people there to justify a cellular base station on an ongoing basis. And they often end up being the trigger points for things like engines overheating, and in the supply chain you may find that you have issues in the remote areas. And so whilst we use cellular, we also use satellite. We are a satellite operator, and I think there's a good mix if you both add it together regionally.
Any additional thoughts?
And this is Paul, and I certainly agree with that. I know Verizon is always looking to expand its global capabilities. We just joined the GSMA and are incorporating our IoT security credentialing into global SIM activation process as a standard. And we are at the Mobile World Congress as we speak this week, again, seeking ways to execute on a global scale. And we've done a lot. We have coverage in over 190 plus countries. But again, to your point, there's a lot of different networks out there, a lot of different carriers, a lot of partnerships to envision, and a lot of different network standards and types being deployed by those different carriers. So it's about establishing the right partnerships and then leveraging other communications technologies that are non-terrestrial to close those gaps.
Well, it really is unfortunate that the top of the hour is coming right up on us here, and I think that it's one of those things that almost every time a question comes up, it depends. There's a lot of factors involved for how to do this the best way, what your options are, how to do it cost effectively, et cetera. And you guys have all provided a lot of insight into that so far. And where some of the questions that have come in from our attendees are specific to their use cases and to their industries, we hope to reach out to you and be in touch and help you answer those questions afterward. We apologize. We did have some technical difficulty, which disrupted the webinar briefly, and there were some audio issues for a number of individuals. So thank you for sticking with us. And thank you, Mike and Michael and Paul, for your time today. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did. We look forward to learning more from you in the future.